So we are in Parshas Tazria on page 609 in the Art Scroll Chumash, in the Stone Art Scroll Chumash, Parshas Tazria. And it's a double Parsha this week, Tazria and Metzora. And it's Rosh Chodesh. So we have a little bit of a bonus Torah reading that we got two Parshias, plus we have a second Sefer Torah where they read the Maftir from Rosh Chodesh. So it's going to be a little longer. Yeah, and page 609, it begins verse chapter 12. Hashem spoke to Moshe saying, "Speak to the children of Israel, saying, when a woman conceives and gives birth to a male, she shall be contaminated for a 7-day period. As during the days of her separation infirmity shall she be contaminated. And on the 8th day, the flesh of his foreskin shall be circumcised." As always, I'll go back to this. For 33 days she shall remain in blood of purity. She may not touch anything sacred, and she may not enter the sanctuary until the completion of her days of purity. Okay. If she gives birth to a female, she shall be contaminated for 2 weeks, as during her separation for 66 days she shall remain in blood of purity. And then we'll talk about what she does after that. So to begin with what's this all about and what does it mean? These are really two different questions. But to begin with, it speaks of if a woman conceives and gives birth to a male, she's contaminated for 7-day periods. Then they had the bris milah on the 8th day, and that's when she could be purified. And then for a female, it's 2 weeks. Again, as during her separation, and for 66 days, shall remain in blood of purity. So to begin with, this, as during the days of her separation infirmity, means during the days of her nida, when she's impure, ritually impure from menstruation. That's the separation infirmity, and it calls it infirmity, as Ramban says, that women get sick when they, very often it feels like they're sick when they menstruate. That's why it's called an infirmity, and she's separation because there's a mitzvah that she has to separate from her husband. Okay, and as we'll see in the end of the Parsha, at the end of Parshas Metzora, that a woman, when she menstruates, so she's ritually impure for 7 days. Okay, so if she gives birth to a male, it's only 7 days, and for a female, it's 14 days. So, where are we? I'll actually finish up until chapter 13 and then come back because there's so much going on here that I want to explain everything together. So in verse 6, and upon the completion of her days of purity for a son or for a daughter, she shall bring a sheep within its first year for an elevation offering, and a young dove or a turtle dove for a sin offering, to the entrance of the tent of meeting to the Kohen. He shall offer it before Hashem and atone for her, and she becomes purified from the source of her blood. This is the law of one who gives birth to a male or female, or to a female. But if she cannot afford a sheep, then she shall take 2 turtle doves or 2 young doves, one for an elevation offering, one for a sin offering, and the Kohen shall provide atonement for her, and she shall be purified. So in either case, she's bringing an offering. It says she's bringing an elevation offering and a sin offering to atone for herself. And the commentaries ask, or the Gemara asks, that what's this atonement? What does she need an atonement for? What did she do wrong? She gave birth. So I think our sages say that when a woman gives birth, it's usually a very painful experience, and there's concern that she may have sworn an oath that she'd never have relations with her husband again, because she would, she's afraid of, this pain is so intense that she doesn't want to go through it again. And so there's concern that she would have made such a vow, so she brings an offering to atone for that. But the Klayaka says something very interesting, and that is that it says in verse 7 that she becomes purified from the source of her blood. What does that mean, from the source of her blood? So he explains, and I saw the Rabbeinu Bachya explains this way as well, that it's referring to what's the source of a woman's blood? That means the source of her menstruation, and that is the sin of Chava. The original sin, or is there a term for that? I don't know. The original, whatever is the original sin. That was the sin of that Chava made a decision to eat from the Eitz Hadas, from the tree of knowledge, and gave of it to her husband Adam. And the punishment that she was assigned for that, part of it was that she would have difficulty and a painful experience giving birth, and that and included in that, it seems, is the menstruation as well. So that's the source of her blood, and that's the atonement. And so the Kli Yakar explains, and the Rabbi Bachya kind of hints at this very much earlier, is that when a woman gives birth and when she goes through so much pain during childbirth, so that's really a reminder to her that why am I experiencing this pain? I'm experiencing this pain because the original woman, our matriarch Chava, ate from the tree of knowledge. She had sinned and caused Adam to sin. And for that reason, after she goes through that pain, she would bring an offering to atone for that sin. And he says as well that that's why for a boy, it's a 7-day period that they would that she would be impure, but for a girl, it's a 14-day period. And the reason why is because with a girl, there are two women involved in the birth. There's the mother and the baby. So she would be impure. She would go through that impurity for herself and for her daughter, for that as really a reminder of that original sin. Okay, and the commentaries also say this. The Gemara says, back to verse 2 and 3, it says that for a boy, she has a 7-day period of impurity, and then on the 8th day they do the bris milah. They circumcise the boy. So the commentaries ask, what's the connection? Like, where did that come from? Why is that being mentioned if we're discussing the impurity after giving birth? What's the relevance of the bris milah, of the circumcision? And I saw or the Gemara actually says that it's in order that you don't have, everybody rejoicing at the bris milah, like everybody's so happy and joyful at this great mitzvah that's being performed, the bris milah, the baby gets its name, and the mother and father are sad because she's impure. So for this reason, the Torah, in a sense, had mercy on them, and allowed her to become pure earlier. And there's very deep concepts that the commentaries say that's behind that. That's a basic idea. Okay, so we said that for a boy, she has if she gives birth to a boy, there's 7 days of impurity. For a girl, there's 14 days of impurity. And then it says for a boy, there's 33 days blood of purity, and for a girl, there's 66 days of blood of purity. What does that mean? What's blood of purity? So the halacha is that during these, like we said, that she's tameh, she's impure during the 7 days or 14 days after she gives birth. But usually the rule is, as we'll see in the end of the parsha, anytime a woman has blood leave her body through menstruation or through whether it's a disease or whatever it is, she's impure at some level. There's impurity at some level. But during these days of the blood of purity that we're saying, 33 days for a boy, 66 days for a girl, if she sees blood during that time, she is not impure. But that's like time we give her any blood, let's say, is assumed to be bleeding coming from the birth, and the Torah says that blood does not make her tameh, does not make her impure. Following that, though, she brings an offering. And then it says that she's purified. Well, what's that so that offering that she's bringing, so until that point, she's pure in every respect. She doesn't, anything she touches doesn't become ritually impure, except she's not allowed to eat any holy meat. So like any offering that's brought, until she's not allowed to eat of that offering, until she would bring this offering after those 33 or 66 days. Okay, so that's this section. Next, we have for the rest of this parsha and most of the next parsha are the laws of the Metzora, one who is struck with tzara'as, with a ritual skin disease. It's usually translated as leprosy, but the commentaries say that this is not a physical, it's not an ailment from a physical source, I should say. And the Kli Yakar says some people want to translate it as leprosy and understand that as leprosy, but the Kli Yakar says whatever it is, it's a physical manifestation of a spiritual disease. That means that there's something rotten spiritually in this person that spiritual sickness manifests itself physically in these skin symptoms, in these symptoms in their skin. And I know from my kids, or some of them have some level of eczema. And I've heard that it's very common in Savannah with all of the allergies that go around. And one thing I was told by the doctors is that stress is a very common trigger for it, that you could have skin issues that come from an emotional disorder, that it could be, like if it's flaring up, it could be something they were exposed to physically, but it could also be, and something's going on emotionally. And that's a trigger for this that manifests itself in their skin. So similarly, the psoras, these skin symptoms that we'll see, is a physical manifestation of a spiritual disease, that there's something wrong with them spiritually that's causing this to come about. So let's start reading at chapter 13, on the bottom of page 609. Hashem spoke to Moshe and Aaron, saying, if a person will have on the skin of his flesh a se'es, a sapachas, or a baheres, these are different descriptions of different like skin ailments, and it will become a tzara'as infliction on the skin of his flesh, it shall be brought to Aaron the Kohen, or to one of his sons the Kohanim. The Kohen shall look at the affliction on the skin of his flesh. If the hair of the affliction has changed to white, and the affliction's appearance is deeper than the skin of his flesh, it is tzara'as affliction. The Kohen shall look at it and declare him contaminated. Now, our sages say that the person could have this affliction, and it could be blindingly obvious what it is, that this is tzara'as. Until the Kohen actually declares him verbally that this person has tzara'as, they don't have tzara'as. It's not contaminating, it's not impure. But once the Kohen makes this declaration, immediately now that person is impure. It's not retroactive to anything. And the commentaries say, why specifically are we bringing him to Kohen? And it's only a Kohen could make this decision. Rabbi Feinstein says that traditionally the Kohen is the teachers of the Jewish people, that in the blessing to the tribe of Levi given by Moshe Rabbeinu before his death, so he said, Yoru Mishpatecha Yaakov, that they'll teach your laws to Yaakov, Israel, and your Torah to Israel. That's the role of the tribe of Levi, and specifically the Kohanim is as teachers of the Jewish people, teachers of the Torah. So it's appropriate to somebody who has this manifestation, and who has this sign that there's these symptoms, that there's something wrong with them spiritually, that they should be going to a Kohen to be instructed in how to and what they need to do to repair themselves spiritually in order to get rid of these symptoms and to purify themselves. Okay, so then it describes a bunch of different types. So let's see in verse 4, I'm not going to go through all of them inside, but in verse 4, if it is a white baheres on the skin of his flesh, another appearance of like a skin disease, and its appearance is not deeper than the skin, and the hair has not changed to white, then the Kohen shall quarantine the affliction for a 7-day period. The Kohen shall look at it on the 7th day, and behold, the affliction retained its color, not like before where the hair turned white. And I'm sorry, that was before. But here, if the appearance didn't change, the color didn't get like deeper, and the affliction did not spread on the skin, it didn't get bigger, then the Kohen shall quarantine it for a second 7-day period. In verse 6, the Kohen shall look at it again on the 7th day, and behold, if the affliction had dimmed, the affliction had not spread on the skin, then the Kohen shall declare him pure. It is a mispachas. He shall immerse his garments, that's immerse them in the mikvah, and become pure. He immerses himself. I'm sorry?
7-day
Yeah.
deal. If it hasn't grown any, why is he condemned again for another 7?
Because it hasn't improved. So until we see improved, meaning the whatever he has is a sign of impurity, not to the point that we'll say he's definitely impure, but there's something wrong. So until we see it start to improve, he's quarantined for that time.
Does the second set of 7 days start on the 7th day of the first set?
I don't know. I would think so, but I don't know. It's a good question. I don't know. Usually we say there's a concept of that part of the day counts as a day. So, but the language of the verse that it says that he waits another 7 days, a second set of 7 days, implies that it's a completely different 7 days than the first ones. So I don't know. I don't know if that last day and first day could overlap. I don't know. Okay. So okay, so then in verse 9, I'm sorry, we have if a tzaras affliction will be in a person who will be brought to the Kohen, etc.
Rabbi,
Yes.
my Chumash in the explanation, it says the seventh day of the first quarantine week also counts as the first day of the second quarantine week.
Oh, there you go. Let's see.
It's an explanation of the fifth verse.
And you have the fifth verse. Let's see. I don't even have anything on the fifth verse. Mine goes from 4 to 6. You have the stone chumash, or you have a different one? Yeah, I don't know. Mine doesn't have that, but I'll trust yours. Okay. So I'll take Sid's word for it. That at least as far as his chumash, he says that it would count as overlap, and that's what I'd assume if not for that language of the verse that it says that he waits a second 7 days implies that it wouldn't overlap. Okay, so now on page 613, verse 12. If the tzaras will erupt on the skin, and the tzaras will cover the entire skin of the affliction from his head to his feet. So until now we were talking about a spot. Now it's the tzaras covers the entire person. Wherever the eyes of the Kohen can see. It doesn't matter. A place that's covered where the Kohen wouldn't be able to see when the person standing normally wouldn't count against this. The Kohen shall look and behold the affliction has covered its entire flesh. Then he shall declare the affliction to be pure. Having turned completely white, it is pure. But on the day healthy flesh appears in it, it shall be contaminated. That's very interesting. It's kind of a contradictory. That if a person is completely covered by this tzaras, by this affliction, then he's fine. But if there's any healthy flesh, then he's not fine. Is that if it's all disease, there's no disease at all. If there's something healthy, then there's something diseased. And I think the way the Klei Yakar looks at it is that that usually when something spreads out, it's less deep. And when something's deeper, it's less spread out. You find that like by root systems of trees, that you have trees that have very wide root systems, but don't go very deep in the ground. And you have trees that the root systems go very deep in the ground, but don't spread out and widely. And he says that if the tzaras covers his entire body, it's kind of indicative that that his sin, whatever his spiritual disease, is broad, but it's not deep. It's not like deeply rooted within him. And for that reason, he doesn't have to go through this whole purification process. Okay. So now verse 18, there's if the flesh will have an inflammation on the skin and it healed, and on the place where it healed, you have certain afflictions. The white says, white perhaps streaked with red. That's another sign of tzaras, of this spiritual disease. And in verse 24, it has when it grows on a burn. In verse 29, we have, this is on page 615, verse 29, a man or a woman in whom there will be an affliction on the scalp or in the beard. So let's see. So here it's a little different because he shaves it. So let's see in verse 32 that if it's not deeper than the skin and there's no dark hair, so he quarantines. And in verse 32, the Kohen shall look at the affliction on the seventh day, and behold, the nesek had not spread, and no golden hair was in it, and the appearance of the nesek is not deeper than the skin. Then he shall shave himself, but he shall not shave the nesek. meaning you shave everything except that spot. And the Kohen shall quarantine the Nesek for a second 7-day period. And the Kohen shall look at the Nesek on the 7th day. Behold, the Nesek had not spread. The spot hasn't spread on the skin, and appearance is not deeper than the skin. Then he's pure. Okay, etc. Now we have if a man has spots in the skin of their flesh, white spots on verse 38, and on page 617, verse 40, we have taras, this skin, the signs in the skin on the head. In verse 40, if the hair of a man's head falls out, he is bald at the back of his head, he is pure. That's, not uncommon. And if his hair falls out to the front of his head, he is frontally bald, he is pure. That's not any sign of spiritual disease. That's a very common male pattern baldness, I think. In verse 42, and if in the posterior or frontal baldness, if a person is going bald, and there shall be a white affliction streaked with red, it is an eruption of tsaras on his posterior or frontal baldness. Then it's an eruption of tsaras. The Kohen shall look at it, and behold, there is this ace affliction that is white streaked with red in his posterior or frontal baldness, like the appearance of tsaras on the skin of the flesh. He is a person with tsaras. He is contaminated. The Kohen shall declare him contaminated. His affliction is upon his head. So the Orach Chaim comments here that it doesn't say, here it says a very strong expression, that it says that he is a person with tsaras. And the fact, we haven't talked about the person really. We've talked about his affliction, the affliction. That spot is a tsaras spot. Whereas here it seems that we're defining the person as a ish tsarua. He's a tsaras man, which is a much stronger expression. And he says it's because that usually when Hashem punishes a person, they're punished in the most private way possible, meaning especially at the beginning, Hashem gives the person a minor hint that maybe there's something wrong that they need that needs atonement. And if they ignore that, so then it starts building. So if this person is having this, right on their head, and really right, it's kind of a sign that there's something really, really wrong there, that Hashem would strike them in such a public, obvious place. So now on page 617, verse 45. So now what actually happens to one with tsaras? So, and the person with tsaras, in whom there is the affliction, his garments shall be rent, that means torn. The hair of his head shall be unshorn, he's not allowed to cut his hair, and he shall cloak himself up to his lips. He has to call out contaminated. All the days that the affliction is upon him, he shall remain contaminated. He is contaminated. He shall dwell in isolation. His dwelling shall be outside the camp. Okay, so that's the rule. Basically, this person is quarantined outside the city. Keep him away from people. And our sages say that one of the primary sins that would manifest itself as tsaras, as the spiritual skin disease, would be as lashon hara, speaking ill of others. And for that reason, just gossiping and talking negatively about other people. And for this reason, when as part of their process of purifying themselves, and especially while they still have this illness, so they have to be away from other people because what they were doing is so damaging to society. This gossiping and speaking ill of others is so damaging to everybody that they have to be kept away from people. Okay, so now in verse 47, the affliction of garments. So now the Torah tells us not only is there such a thing as tsaras in the skin in a person's flesh, there's also tsaras in a person's clothing. And later in the next Parsha in Metzora, we'll see that there's tsaras in a person. There could be tsaras in the walls of one's house. And the Kleyakar brings this, and the commentators bring that, the Ramban, I think, obviously, this is not a natural disease, it's a spiritual, miraculous, really, notice that there's something wrong here, spiritually. And additionally, the Kleyakar says that this really gives us perspective of what the tsaras is about, what it comes for. And he says that we really find three things that a person gets tzaras. Maybe there might be midrashim that bring more, but he says, like we said, one of them is lashon hara, gossiping, speaking ill of others. One of them is gaiva, is arrogance, feeling above other people, and one of them is stinginess, which in Hebrew is tsaras ayin. It's like narrow. It's kind of narrowing of the eyes, which is like looking, being stingy and really begrudging what other people have, and really wanting to keep everything for oneself. And those are really the three things tzaras comes for. And the Klayakar says that perhaps that's the reason for these three different types of tzaras. That is, there's tzaras in a person's body, tzaras in a house, and tzaras in clothing. And he says that the body is for the speaking, and the house, he says, or right now we're in the clothing. He's saying the clothing is the kind of the source of arrogance. That they say that like the clothing, you could look at a person's shoes and know everything about the person, and it's something that really manifests, that really shows a person's arrogance and what a person thinks of themselves. That it's something that you could get shoes for, $30 to $50. You could get a pair of shoes. You could get a nice, comfortable pair of shoes for, what would you say, $150, $200. You get a decent like shoe that's very comfortable. You could get like, shoes that look great and feel like you're floating on clouds for $500. And you could get shoes for $1,000. You could get shoes for $2,000.
You
And
can also go to Skechers, 60 or 70.
that's what I was saying. You could get a decent pair of shoes for $50 in DSW, right? And suits also. A person could get a suit on sale for $100. They could get an off the rack for $200. They could get a nice $500 suit, or like a custom $800 suit, or $1,000 or $2,000 or $3,000 or $10,000, a watch, jewelry. These are all things that, and why is someone spending so much money? It makes them feel important. And that's kind of he says, he quotes a verse that we say actually in the Song of the Day of Friday, that we say at the end of davening on Friday, is Hashem Malach Geus Lavish, that Hashem kind of wears arrogance, being above others, as a garment. That clothing expresses what a person thinks of themselves. And so the tzaras in the garment expresses that perhaps the person's sin is arrogance. And he says in the house, our sages say that when there's tzaras, when there's this leprosy, whatever you'd call it, in the house, so what they would have to bring out everything in the house, anything that's in the house, they would bring out before the Kohen comes, because once the Kohen declares it impure, everything in the house would also be impure. So they'd want to bring everything out first, so then it's not inside the house when the Kohen declares it impure. And like we said, it's not retroactive. So that would save everything. So then this person who's constantly, people are coming from for charity, to solicit donations, and he's saying, sorry, I don't have that kind of money. I can't give to that. And now everyone sees what he has. Everything in his house is brought out, and everybody sees what the person is really dealing with. Okay, so now what's the laws in verse 47, page 617? If there shall be tzaras affliction in the garment, in a woolen garment, a linen garment, or in the warp of the woof in the linen, or wool in the leather, etc. And the affliction shall be deep green or deep red in the garment, or the leather, or the warp, or the woof, or in any leather utensil. And this is where there's no physical explanation for these things. It is a tzaras affliction, and it shall be shown to the Kohen. The Kohen shall look at the affliction. He shall quarantine the affliction for a 7-day period, page 619, verse 51. He shall look at the affliction on the 7th day. If the affliction is spread in the garment, or the warp, or the woof of the leather, the warp or the woof, just to be clear, are the yarn running in this direction and running in that direction. It's just when they weaved it, they would be done in a different way. So they have different names. For whatever purpose the leather has been fashioned, the affliction is a malignant tzaras. It is contaminated. he shall burn the garment, the warp of the woof of the wool of the linen, or any leather utensil in which the affliction may be. But as a malignant tzaras, it shall be burned in fire. But if the Kohen shall look and behold the affliction is not spread, the Kohen shall command they shall wash the area of the affliction, shall quarantine it for a second 7-day period. In verse 55, and the Kohen shall look after the affliction has been washed, and behold, it has not changed its color, it has not spread, it is contaminated. You shall burn it in fire as a penetrating affliction in his worn garment or in his new garment. But if the Kohen shall look and behold the affliction grew dimmer after it was washed, it changed in a positive way, he shall rip it from the garment or from the leather, the warp of the woof. He just tears out that part, but the rest is okay. And if it appears again, then you have to burn it in fire. But if the garment, the warp of the woof, or any leather utensil has been washed, and then the affliction left them, you wash it and it's gone, then it shall be immersed again, it shall become pure. This is the law of the tzaras affliction, the garment of wool, linen, warp, woof, or any leather utensil, to declare pure, or to declare it contaminated. Okay, so now that is tzaras of the person, tzaras of the clothes. Now the next parsha, page 621, Parshas Metzora, discusses how a person, once let's say it leaves them, they had this affliction, it went away. Now what do they do? So chapter 14, Hashem spoke to Moshe, saying, this is the law of the Metzora on the day of his purification. It shall be brought to the Kohen. The Kohen shall go forth to the outside the camp. The Kohen shall look and behold the tzaras affliction has been healed from the Metzora. The Kohen shall command, and for the person being purified, there shall be taken 2 live clean birds, cedar wood, crimson thread, and hyssop. So about the cedar wood and hyssop, our sages say, this is, the Kli Yakar said, reflecting the arrogance that's the cause, is that if a person feels tall like the cedar, which is a very tall tree, he should lower himself like the hyssop, which is a very low shrub. And the clean birds, the 2 birds here also, the Kli Yakar said the birds really reflect all of them. Our sages say that the birds are about that a person is speaking ill of others. It's like a bird that's constantly tweeting, and maybe Twitter maybe got its name might be very appropriate from all the ill that's spoken there, but it's just the person should take a lesson from not like Twitter like a bird, constantly tweeting, making noise, and the speaking about others. And also a bird flies. A bird is above everything. It's flying above every other living creature, which also reflects arrogance. And I don't remember what he says about the stinginess, but he does have, it's about that money. There's, I think it's in Mishlei, it says that money tends to, don't get too attached to money because it tends to fly away like a bird, that it can be like here today and gone tomorrow. And, okay, where are we? So he takes these things, the Kohen shall command, and the 1 bird shall be slaughtered into an earthenware vessel over spring water. As for the live bird, he shall take it with the cedar wood, the crimson thread, the hyssop, and he shall dip them and the live bird into the blood of the bird that was slaughtered over the spring water. Then he shall sprinkle 7 times upon the person being purified from the tzaras. He shall purify him, and he shall set the live bird free upon the open field. And here our sages, and the Kli Yakar says that these 2 birds, one of them which is slaughtered, and one which is set free, also is about our speech, this tweeting, and the noise they make. It's about our speech, that it's to teach this person that speaking ill of others is bad, and that you slaughter. But we there's positives we could do with our speech. We could pray to Hashem, we could study Torah, and we could encourage people, and these are positive things we could do with our speech. That should be set free, let loose, and that we should continue. Now the person being purified shall immerse, in verse 8, the person being purified shall immerse his clothing, shave off all his hair, and immerse himself in the water, become pure. So he shaves all the hair, his head, his body, his face. Thereafter he may enter the camp, but he shall dwell outside his tent for 7 days. And in verse 9, on the 7th day he shall shave off all his hair, his beard, his eyebrows, and all his hair shall shave off, shall immerse his clothing, immerse his flesh in water, and become pure. Again, here the Kli Yakar says it specifies 3 areas he shaves: his hair, his beard, and his eyebrows. And here also, his head represents arrogance, that's, being above it all. His beard represents speech, around his mouth represents speaking ill of others, and his eyebrows around his eye, right above his eyes, represents this tsaras ayin, the stinginess. And like we said, it's literally means narrowing of his eyes, looking at others and begrudging what they have. Okay, and he immerses his clothing and then becomes pure, and then he brings some offerings. Okay, so now it describes the offerings on page 623 and 625. And in verse 33 on page 625, we have the tsaras of a building. Like we said, Hashem spoke to Moshe and Aaron saying, when you arrive in the land of Canaan that I give you as a possession, I will place tsaras affliction upon a house in the land of your possession. The one to whom the house belongs shall come and declare to the Kohen, saying, something like the affliction has appeared to me in the house. Now, sages say that it says here that that this is specifically when you arrive in the land of Canaan, that this only took place in Eretz Yisrael. That it was only in the land of Israel that we would have this tsaras, but not anywhere else. And our sages say that tsaras, it's a negative that a person, like that they have this impurity, but at the same time, it's a great merit to have it. That we know that the most dangerous diseases are the ones that have no symptoms until they ravage the person's body. That's they say that a person who doesn't feel pain is in tremendous danger because they don't know, they never know, like, are they getting burned? Are they getting seriously injured? And they don't know that because they don't feel pain. And especially with, like I said, that diseases are the most dangerous when a person doesn't know they have them and doesn't know to treat them because they can't feel the symptoms. And that's true spiritually as well, that the most dangerous thing is if a person has a spiritual malignancy within them and don't realize it. So this is a positive that when we have Hashem sends us these signs, Hashem sends us a notice that that look, there's something wrong that needs to be dealt with, that there's a spiritual disease here. So it's a great kindness of Hashem, and that kind of miraculous intervention that we have is only given to us in the land of Israel, in the holiest place, not outside. Okay, so you declare to the Kohen that you saw something. In verse 36 on page 627, the Kohen shall command that they shall clear the house before the Kohen comes to look at the affliction, so that everything in the house shall not become contaminated. Like I said before, that the contamination was only after the Kohen verbally declares it contaminated, not retroactive, so they would take everything out so everything in the house wouldn't be contaminated. And the process is very similar to the clothing. Okay. Now, on page 629, the last section of the Parsha is about various impurities that come from something issuing from a person's body. So, page 629, chapter 15, Hashem spoke to Moshe and Aaron, saying, speak to the children of Israel and say to them, any man who will have a discharge from his flesh, his discharge is contaminated. This is something is where, let's see, I believe, what is this? Okay. Yeah, so this is when a person has a discharge that's similar to semen, but it doesn't come from any arousal. I know that there are some disease, some STDs that have this as a symptom. I'm not ready to say that that's what the Torah is referring to, but it's referring to when a person has an unexplained discharge that's similar to semen, but does not have any explanation, any arousal that would have caused it. So his discharge is contaminated. Thus shall be his contamination. Whether his flesh runs with his discharge, it becomes stopped up because of his discharge. Any bedding upon which the person with the discharge shall reclaim shall be contaminated. Any vessel which he sits shall be contaminated. The person who touches his bedding shall immerse his garments and immerse himself in water. He has to go to the mikveh and dip his clothing in the mikveh. He remains contaminated until the evening. Anyone who sits upon the vessel upon which the man with the discharge sat, even needs to dip in the mikveh and immerse his clothing in the mikveh. And any writing equipment, anyone who touches anything that was beneath him needs to immerse in the mikveh. Basically, anything that comes in contact with this person in any way, so needs to be immersed in the mikveh. In verse 13, when the man with the discharge ceases his discharge, he shall count for himself 7 days from his cessation, immerse his garments, and immerse his flesh in spring water, and become purified. So you say that's if he saw it 2 days. That's if he saw it twice. If he saw it once, he waits to the next day he could immerse in the mikveh, and by evening he's pure. But if he sees it twice, so now he has to wait 7 days without any discharge, and he would immerse it in the mikveh, and he's purified. And then he has to bring an offering on the 8th day. Now in verse 16, and that offering, so if he saw it 3 times, this is all derived from the verses in the Gemara. In verse 16, a man from whom there is a discharge of semen, this is a regular discharge that comes from arousal, shall immerse his entire flesh in the water and shall remain contaminated until evening. Any garment of anything of leather upon which there shall be semen shall be immersed in water, shall remain contaminated until evening. All of this is not really relevant these days. That this immersion that is talking about immersing in the mikveh for these things are because of ritual, to attain ritual purity. And these days, most people are ritually impure anyway through contact with the dead. If a person's ever been in a cemetery or done a tahara or things of that nature, or come into really any kind, been under the same roof as a dead body, so they would be ritually impure and would not be able to become pure these days. You need the red cat, the ashes of the red cat. We don't have that. So this really isn't so relevant these days. It's not so practically relevant, I should say, these days. The next ones, though, are. So in verse 18, a woman with whom a man will have carnal relations, they shall immerse themselves in the water and remain contaminated. Okay, so now in verse 19, here's where it becomes, it has more of a relevance these days, practically. When a woman who has a discharge, her discharge from her flesh being blood, she shall be in a state of separation for a 7-day period, and anyone who touches her shall remain contaminated until evening. So this is the mitzvah of nida. When a woman menstruates, according to Torah law, she is impure for 7 days, and then she would dip in the mikveh, and she becomes pure. Okay, and this is practically relevant these days, because in next week's Parsha, in Achrei Mos, it discusses that a woman who is ritually impure by virtue of being a nida from menstruation, or the next one is zava, is prohibited from having relations with a man, which would include with her husband. So this is practical nowadays, that when a woman is impure through these 2 things, the nida and zava, from menstruation, so she is prohibited from having relations with her husband until she would go to the mikveh. Okay, so now in verse 25, we have the laws of zava. So nida is through a normal menstruation. In that case, she's impure for 7 days, and she dips in the mikveh, she's pure. Once again, this is biblical law. Rabbinically, maybe we'll discuss, I won't be here next week, but rabbinically, it ends up being longer. But in verse 25, Azava, if a woman's blood flows for many days outside of her period of separation, that means that she sees blood when she wouldn't expect to see based on her menstruation pattern. And the way this works practically is that once she, let's say, has a menstruation, so for 7 days, any blood that she sees is considered part of that, not a problem. If she sees after those 7 days, for the next 11 days, that's the period that we're talking about now. So, or if she has a flow after a separation, in the 11 days following the 7 days from when she started menstruating, all the days of her contaminated flow shall be like the days of her separation. She's contaminated, and it gives any bedding, anything she leans on, anything she touches is impure, ritually impure. And in verse 25, it says many days. If a woman's blood flows for many days, what's many days? So days is plural, that's 2. Many days adds to that, so it's 3 days. So if she sees blood 3 days during that period, during those 11 days, she's impure in this way, and she must count 7 days for herself, and afterwards she can be purified. And again, and then verse 29, on the 8th day, on page 635, she shall take for herself 2 turtle doves or 2 young doves. She shall bring them to the Kohen. She brings an offering, and the Kohen shall provide atonement for her before Hashem from her contaminated flow. And again, here the Kli Yakar says that this atonement is about the source of her blood, is about the sin of the original sin of Chava. And in verse 31, you shall separate the children of Israel from their contamination, and they shall not die as a result of their contamination. If they contaminate my tabernacle that is among them, that if someone eats, let's say, enters the tabernacle when they're impure, they're subject to a heavenly punishment. And this is the teaching concerning a man with a discharge, and from whom there is a seminal discharge through which he becomes contaminated, and concerning a woman who suffers from a separation, and concerning a person who has his flow, whether male or female, and concerning a man who lies with a contaminated woman. So this is all the halachas of that ritual purity and impurity that comes through issue from a person's body, whether it be a man or a woman. And just the Haftorah for this week is the Haftorah for Rosh Chodesh, so it's a special Haftorah. Okay, shkoyach.